I am Aaron, one of the co-founders of Risotto, an IT help desk in Slack, and we're doing something a little bit different today. We're doing something fun. I have a very special guest here on the inaugural Risotto podcast. We'll see if this sticks around or not, but I'm speaking with Jay Srinivasan. He is a 3-time entrepreneur. His first venture was Appurify. His second company was called atSpoke, and his third company that he's actually currently at today is called Stitchflow. I believe all 3 of these were aimed at IT buyers. Is that right, Jay?
2 of the 3. My first startup, Appurify, was mobile testing infrastructure, but atSpoke was for IT teams, and then Stitchflow was for IT teams as well.
Awesome. Well, and that is one of the biggest reasons why I was so excited to get introduced to you a few months ago by a mutual friend of ours. And particularly so because atSpoke, which was your second startup, and we'll get into like the time period and the whole story, but that product was an IT help desk in Slack. And it's in many ways was part of the inspiration for Risotto, which is what we're building today. And so your idea inspired us, and some of your customers from back then remember atSpoke, and they talked about what a delightful, amazing product it was, and how Risotto in some ways reminds them of atSpoke. And so this is one of the biggest reasons why I was excited to talk to you today. So I know you're on your third venture now. You're doing Stitchflow, and I want to get to that too, as I'm sure you have some updates for us to share in terms of why you're building Stitchflow now. But I'd love to start with atSpoke. And I think the best way to begin is at the beginning. And so maybe you could just set the scene for us, set the stage. Tell me a little bit about your co-founders when you started atSpoke. How did you get this idea? When was this? Yeah, just kind of walk me through it a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, I think to give you a proper answer to that question, I need to roll back to before atSpoke. And so I grew up in an academic family. I thought, like studying was the thing to do. My dad was a professor. And so for something like 25 years until I finished a PhD in computer science, that was my focus. And at some point I realized this is not what I want to do. I want to go into the business world. And so I got out of computer architecture research, which is what my PhD was in, and said, hey, I want to go into the business world. And I went and joined a consulting firm called McKinsey, because in my mind, McKinsey meant business. And so then I went and spent 5 years at McKinsey learning business, which I really didn't learn. But what I found was I didn't want to be a consultant, because as a consultant, you gave recommendations, but you weren't actually responsible for anything. And so I wanted to be responsible for something. And so I got into startups, and I had no idea what I should do. I had no marketable skills. I had a PhD that I didn't do anything with. I was a consultant for a bunch of different things. And I met my co-founders for my first startup, Appurify, and they were super smart technical folks that did mobile device hacking. And so Appurify started there. And I promise I'm getting to the atSpoke journey, but Appurify was my first startup. And we started Appurify in 2012, right when there was this mobile explosion, Android, iOS, devices, networks. And there was this problem around testing mobile apps. We started this company. It wasn't very good, but it was such an important trend that we were just really, really successful and got acquired in 2 years by Google. And so my first taste of entrepreneurship was Appurify, which through no skill of ours just happened to be a really, really good outcome. And then I was at Google and I was like, oh, I'm great at startups. And so that is where the atSpoke journey starts, where I'm like, hey, I can go do anything. What should we go start a company in? And so I had 2 co-founders for atSpoke who were with me during the Appurify days, Pratyush, my head of engineering, and David Kaneda, who was my head of design. And the 3 of us were at Google, resting, investing, going to all the different Google cafes and thinking about what to go build next. And we went through this whole journey over the course of a year. And even though I knew absolutely nothing about IT, someone told us about ServiceNow. We started learning about the IT space, and then we're like, oh, we can build the next ServiceNow. And so and that is how we started thinking about atSpoke. So long story short, I had no background in IT. My co-founders had no background in IT. We thought we could build anything because we luckily had a good first startup. And so we started thinking about atSpoke. The core thesis was this. IT teams everywhere required a ticketing system, required a service desk. That's how they managed their work. And in 2016, when we started, or 2015, when we started thinking about atSpoke, the big options were ServiceNow on the enterprise side or JIRA Service Management, Zendesk, and Freshservice, an early version of Freshservice on the mid-market and SMB side. And we saw that software and we're like, wow, this is like super form-based, super archaic. We could build a better version of that. So we started thinking about the ticketing space. We thought we'd be successful. We're outsiders, but we can go build anything. And so we started thinking about the ticketing space. And sort of our three core insights for atSpoke were 2016 was when Slack was taking off. We were like, it's so much easier to do work on Slack. If you're in a company and you use Slack, why would you go fill out a super painful ticket form? You're just going to ping somebody on Slack. And so how do you incorporate Slack into ticketing was sort of the first thing that we started thinking about. It was just obvious. You had to do Slack. Like everything that you built those days had to start with Slack. So that was one part of it. Second part of it was ML. It's nothing like today. Machine learning and AI, it's nothing like today, but machine learning was getting better. And we're like, you know what? A lot of tickets are repetitive. We should be able to apply some machine learning principles and automate some tickets. And so that was the sort of second core thesis. So thesis 1, Slack. Thesis 2, machine learning. And then the third thesis has to do with the UI and the usability of ServiceNow or Jira Service Management or Freshservice, which was basically, they weren't easy to use by IT and they certainly weren't easy to use by any other team in the company. What if we applied modern design principles and ease of use to ticketing? And so the combination of those three things was how we started thinking about atSpoke, and that's when we started the company.
Amazing. As you were saying all of that, it's funny because I was going through the checklist in my head and I was like, Jira, Freshservice, and Zendesk. Yep, still around, still doing their thing. Redundant IT tickets that you could automate with AI. Yep, still the case. And Slack as the primary surface area that's the best experience to meet employees where they're at. Yep, still a thing. So this is so amazing because your insights withstood the test of time. You were seeing things that have, I would argue, become more true today than they even were back then. And yet you saw them 10 years earlier. So I applaud you for that. I honestly think that vision is one of the hardest things to have as an entrepreneur. And it's exciting to hear about how those years went. And so, okay, so we're at the point, you've got your co-founders, you've got an idea, you've got a core thesis. How did you get started? Did you raise? Because one of the most common questions I get from entrepreneurs is, do I build first and get traction, or do I try to raise first and, get some funds that I can maybe build out the team or invest more in applications and technology? Did you try to raise first or build and get traction first? And just how did you approach the first year?
Yeah. I mean, my answer is going to start by acknowledging the privilege of my position having had a successful first startup. And so the simple truth was we had a successful first startup in Appurify that Google bought within 2 years for a good outcome. And so it wasn't hard for us to raise money. It took a long time for us to raise venture capital, even a very small seed round for Appurify, my first company. It was not hard at all for atSpoke, which was in those days called Spoke. And the basic idea was, and we'll talk about this, right? Like, in fact, I think the fact that we were able to raise, frankly, a lot of money very quickly, what actually worked against us. And when I talk about like sort of our journey in atSpoke, I'll go through some of the downsides of being able to raise too much money. But the actual fundraise itself wasn't a problem at all. We had our pick of VCs who both liked the idea as well as were willing to fund us. And so we actually didn't even raise a seed round. We raised a Series A as our first round. And within like 6 months, somebody who wanted to do the Series A, but couldn't, preempted our Series B. So we raised a lot of money, too much money, very, very quickly. So for what it's worth, we never raised money after that, even though we wanted to at times. And I'll talk about why. But that's the answer to that question. We actually had a pretty big fundraise that we started off with, and we were coming out of Google. And so we're like, yeah, we're going to be like Google. We're going to have like snacks and drinks and all that stuff. And we started building.
Wow. Wow. So just to make sure I heard that right, you raised a Series A at the beginning, before you even really had a product or before you had customers? That's amazing.
And then Series B while we're still building it. So yeah, no, that was it. I don't recommend it, by the way. I do not. I like, for what it's worth, Stitchflow, my third startup, we had a good exit for atSpoke as well. So Stitchflow, my third startup, intentionally only went and raised a seed round. And so that's like one of the learnings from the atSpoke journey from an entrepreneurial perspective.
There's some really interesting nuggets there. And yeah, I think it's a sign of a mature, wise entrepreneur to realize that, money is far from the solution to all problems. And in fact, it in some cases can introduce additional problems, because maybe now you're trying to solve problems by spending money that should be solved in other ways. And, preemptively taking on too much burn before you actually build a more sustainable business. But nonetheless, it sounds like you are off to a high-flying start. You were probably, I'm guessing, pretty excited in that first year and thinking you guys were really onto a big thing, which you were. So one thing I want to drill into on that year one is you said you were going after ServiceNow. Ultimately, we all know that, startups need a wedge, an entry into the market, a way to get started. Rome wasn't built in a day. Google certainly didn't start as Google. As we know it today, they had a wedge. What was, and you probably talked a little bit about it with Slack and AI, but what kind of customers were you going after in year one? And how did you get your initial success? And what challenges did you run into?
It wasn't easy. So let me be very clear. Between raising too much money and not having experience in IT, we did a lot of inefficient things, and it took a while for us to get out of the woods. And so I'm going to start with that. The point that you made earlier, I would say the one thing that we were correct about was the combination of Slack, machine learning, and sort of design to enable multiple teams to use the system. That existed throughout. That said, we didn't know squat about the IT space. We didn't know squat about who to sell to, what they were looking for, et cetera. So when we started Spoke, our core thesis was it wasn't a thesis, in fact. Our approach was, hey, we're going to build this new way of managing accountability across your company. And at the end of the day, in my mind, a ticket is nothing more than an accountable interaction. You have a Slack message, which is not an accountable interaction, it's just an interaction. You have an Asana project, which is a project. And then there's a step in between where it's essentially a little bit more than a message, and you need to make sure that it is tracked. It's almost like a task. And so we were saying, look, IT is not the only place that requires this accountable interaction. Legal needs it, HR needs it, finance needs it, facilities needs it. What if we built a single system for everyone to be the system of accountability within an organization, the system of transactional accountability within an organization? And so on day one, we were trying to be a company-wide tool. That's number one. And I'll tell you all the mistakes with that. But on day one, we wanted to be a company-wide tool. The second, you have to make a decision when you're building a ticketing system on whether you are going to sit on top of existing systems and improve them. For example, sit on top of JIRA, JIRA Service Management, or Freshservice, and have a really robust Slack interaction or machine learning, or sit on top of ServiceNow and do machine learning, or be a full standalone system. And both approaches have pros and cons. We took the hard path, which was, hey, we're not only going to be a company-wide tool on day one, we're going to be a full stack ticketing system or a full stack system on day one. So that's how we started. Now, it was a really, really hard first 2 years because one, machine learning or AI, it was not how it is now in 2016, 2017. There was a lot more sort of grunt work, fundamental stuff that we had to do. So that was a lot of work. But we were also essentially building a full ticketing system without being experts in IT and also trying to do something that every team in a company would use. And we also had the hubris of saying, hey, we know what we're doing because we know how ticketing should look. We know how everything should look. So we didn't even have the grounding in what a good ticketing system should have. So long story short, because we had a bunch of money in the bank, we took 2 years to build V1 of Stitchflow. Good news, it maintained the core principles, which was Slack, machine learning, multi-team design first. Bad news, we didn't understand really what ticketing features were valuable for IT or other teams in a company, and we didn't understand the buying dynamics of IT teams, et cetera. So the first 2 years was a lot of building, and then we launched. Crickets, went nowhere. It was really, 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 really hard. In fact, if I could go back and do it again, I'd like kick myself and say, I would those 2 years should have been like 3 months or 4 months in reality. So we basically did that for 2 years. Then we were like, okay, actually, guess what? People don't want exactly what we've built. We needed to understand what the components of our ticketing system, the Slack part, the machine learning part, the multi-team, well-designed part, great. However, that doesn't mean we can forget the basics of what ticketing is. You need private notes. You need routing rules. You need XYZ, like the components that ticketing requires. And so first 2 years, built a bunch of really beautiful stuff. No one cared about it because it was missing a bunch of stuff. Year 3, we then realized, oh, wow, we got to go build all of the ticketing features to actually make this a useful product. So I'd say it took actually 3 years for Spoke to get to the right spot, after which we started seeing multiple.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to make sure I heard all that right. I want to read some of that back to you. So it sounds like in the first 2 years, you had raised a lot of money. You were in a good position financially, at least to spend and to build. You spent the first roughly 2 years building the first version of your product, which was centered on the thesis of you needed an end-to-end ticketing system that could extend to every organization in the department, that was Slack first with the AI woven throughout to automate redundant tasks. And you didn't even attempt to get users or really early feedback or design partners early on. You just chose to build first and then have a big launch moment. So were you in stealth that time? Like, did anybody even did you have a landing page, or did anybody know what atSpoke was before you launched?
We had a landing page, and we weren't actively not trying to, we were talking to customers, but even sort of recognizing that we're actually an IT service management tool. And that should be what we are, which means there's a certain type of buyer that has certain requirements. Took us a while to figure out. And so we had pilot users, we had people that were giving us feedback, but some of the pilot users were facilities teams or ops teams. Some of the pilot teams were HR teams. It was like different size companies, et cetera. And so one, it just took a lot of time to build, but I don't think we were even focused in terms of who we were trying to serve on day one, so that we could be super clear about, no, these are the 5 things we absolutely need to enable. And so that, I think about this often, and there's a reason Stitchflow is in IT, is also selling to IT. My current company, Stitchflow, is selling to IT teams. It's because one, I have a passion for serving IT teams. I really like IT teams. But 2, I don't want to go through that learning process again. There is a lot of learning. If there's any advice I can give to anybody that's thinking of starting a business, oh my God, you have no idea how much you don't know. And it is just, you're like, oh my God, from outside in, you're like, why are they doing it this way? I'm sure this is a better way. No, it's not. There's a reason things are the way they are. And you need to have the humility to go through that process and learn it. And so that is a lot of what the first 2 years of Spoke were. We built a lot of good things, but we weren't precise about who we were trying to serve and iterating really, really quickly to get to that.
Wow. Yeah, that really resonates. And I've heard suggestions before that you need to become a domain expert. This takes a lot of time. The other thing that I heard you say that I thought was interesting was, you did a lot of interviews. You talked to people who were testing and giving you feedback. One of the things that I've learned as an entrepreneur is that there's a difference between somebody telling you something and giving you some feedback, and then coming to the point where you say, okay, now do you want to pay for this and actually buy it? And there's such a gap between, what they say they want often and what they'll actually pay for. And so my suspicion, based on if I'm reading between the lines, is that, when you say you think you could have compressed those 2 years into 3 or 4 months, is that had you started to try to build and sell earlier on, you may have realized that these shortcomings you had mentioned, like the private comments and the things that are required table stakes really for an end-to-end ticketing system, you may have realized that earlier on. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely fair to say. I mean, to give ourselves a little bit of grace, it was harder to build stuff in 2016 or 2018 or 2017 than it is now. And so some of the things just took time, especially on the ML side, even the Slack components, et cetera.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Hey, will you pay for this? Trying to do that much, much quicker was something that we should have done way earlier. And here's the problem actually with Spoke, the early days of Spoke. Our proof of concept when we started talking to customers, and again, don't think about the chat, don't think about today from an AI perspective. Think about 2016, 2017. We had a Slack bot. We had a Slack bot where our canonical demo was to go to the Slack bot and say, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? And it would instantly respond with the Wi-Fi password. And everybody was like, oh my God, the Wi-Fi, I hated, I could never find the Wi-Fi password. It's like, it was magical. And and that was in fact, frankly, false signal. No, it wasn't false signal. We saw that there was use there. And so people were like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Keep going. When we didn't realize, well, actually, exactly your point. There are these 8 other things that I need before I can actually purchase this. Otherwise, I just have this like cool widget that tells me what the Wi-Fi password is.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. And again, just to highlight the parallels in Risotto during Y Combinator, when Risotto was just getting off the ground, our very first demo example was what's the Wi-Fi password. And you're absolutely right. It illustrates the concept of what's possible, but it's far from a truly useful tool. And we also had to go through quite a long building phase and iteration phase to get Risotto to the point today where now it can do multi-step troubleshooting. It can actually handle redirects and curveballs, and it can do tier 1 triage questions to collect more information before deciding what to do next. And so we also started and we struggled with the basics, and we realized, there's a lot of table stakes and things we needed to layer on top to make this truly useful. I would love to ask you about the strategy to go after ServiceNow, and when you were maybe after, let's go to year 2, year 3, like around that time period. What size customers were you trying to acquire, and where were you getting your early traction in terms of company size?
So first of all, again, we wanted to go after ServiceNow, as was the hubris of a second-time founder in 2016. Now I realize how hard that is. But the basic thesis is this. The basic thesis of the serving IT and ServiceNow, et cetera, was the only way, in my mind, that any company is going to be the next ServiceNow is to come from underneath. In other words, and if you could start with ticketing, you could start with SaaS management, you could start with CMDB, you can start with something and work your way up. But there's no way to directly go after ServiceNow. You can't go ahead. First of all, there's just too much to build, but also you can't go sell head on. You can't come from above, like MoveWorks that recently got acquired by ServiceNow is a great example of that. Fantastic team, fantastic outcome. But at the end of the day, they were subsumed by ServiceNow. And so going right after ServiceNow, going after the enterprise, trying to be a full replacement of ServiceNow is incredibly hard. And what's hard in 2016 is probably even harder now. So our basic thesis was this. How do you build a modern full IT solution, but start with smaller customers and then constantly add capabilities, grow with your customers as they become the enterprises of the future, but also add capabilities and serve more and more larger and larger teams? That was the core thesis behind the atSpoke approach. And I still strongly believe that that is probably the most effective way to become the next ServiceNow. It's just going to take a damn long time. And so when we first started serving customers in atSpoke, probably in year 2, but really we started getting repeatability in year 3 once we once we had the table stakes ticketing features, we started small. Initially, we were serving, let's say, 200 person companies and smaller. We were like the first ticketing system that you would use. Then as we added more and more capabilities, we got to 300, 400, 500, 1,000. I think when we were acquired by Okta, our largest customers were probably a few thousand employees, but there's still a long way to go in terms of that journey. So we were essentially every year, every quarter, every half year, just building features that allowed us to serve a larger customer and a larger customer. And that was the approach that we were taking.
That makes sense. And I've been in a similar journey before. I started my tech career at HelloSign, which was catering to SMBs and lower mid-market, I would say. And we also had ambitions to move up market. It turned out to be a lot harder than we thought. But one of the things that did work in our favor, and this is what you were described as the come from beneath strategy, which I like that description. What you mean, tell me if this is correct. You mean enter the market in a lower segment, size-wise, going after the smaller customers first, let them prove out the early concept and the early vision, give you feedback, but then start to build and add features required for bigger companies, bigger customers, larger teams, higher scale usage, and you just move up market is what you're suggesting. And one of the things I really like about that strategy, tell me if you agree with this, is it forces you to emphasize usability, user experience, ease of use, and intuitive, delightful product experience, because that's what the smaller companies demand, because they want something that's fast, easy, and effective. They don't have an entire team. Like take JIRA, for example. JIRA, it can be quite difficult to manage. It's so configurable. It's a platform. It's an ecosystem. Some larger companies have entire teams built around configuring, designing, implementing, maintaining JIRA. A small business can't do that. So they need something fast, easy, and effective that works out of the box. And if you nail that, then, well, the bigger companies actually can appreciate that too. And it's a great way to land and then expand. Was land and expand also a part of your strategy?
Yeah, no, land and expand was, but I, by the way, completely agree with what it means to serve smaller companies first. The product needs to be a lot more complete. Maybe you don't need all the features that a larger company demands, but sort of the end-to-end experience needs to be more put together, more usable. Let's be very clear. It's also the harder approach. Like a sort of canonical VC funded startup should probably just go after the enterprise and then just go solve one problem and do sales and go after it. And it was like, this was pushback we got when we started Spoke, when we were fundraising for Spoke. The big question was, are you sure you want to do this for SMBs and mid-market first? Why don't you go sit on top of ServiceNow and build something? And even with Stitchflow, our focus is serving serving upper SMB and mid-market. We're starting there as well. And VCs hate this. Like they are like, you should go after larger enterprise, and it makes a lot of sense. However, to your exact point, you build a more complete product. And I also think, frankly, at some level, mid-market and SMB are more discerning customers. There's a higher bar to cross in terms of even their willingness to pay, et cetera. And so it's a harder journey in a lot of ways, but you get to build to build a complete product.
One of the other questions I just wanted to ask you was, were you trying to get customers to replace an existing help desk, like say they had JIRA or they had Freshservice or Zendesk? Was your value prop in the demo, in the sales calls, we're better, replace Zendesk or JIRA with atSpoke?
Yeah, it was. And that's hard. It's obviously super hard to rip and replace. That said, if you're trying to be an ITSM player, you have no choice. There's obviously new companies or companies that are just setting up their first ticketing system. And so that is one category. But outside of that, most IT teams have a ticketing system. Most IT teams have an ITSM. And so if you are trying to be a full ITSM, that is the only option, which is you need to rip and replace an existing ticketing system. It could be JIRA. In our case, it was almost always one of JIRA, JIRA Service Management, Freshservice, or Zendesk. And that comes with all of its own complexities in terms of when they can do it, the change management, et cetera. But yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Tell me about the change management. What would that be like for a customer? Would you, like, how long does it take to replace Jira with atSpoke?
In reality, you would think it took a lot of time, but in reality, it didn't. For a few reasons. And by the way, as we started serving larger companies, it did take longer because they'd want to transfer their knowledge base over. And let's be very clear, we're talking about 2016 to 2021 when we sold atSpoke. And I think it's actually harder now. Exactly, because workflows are much more prevalent. There's actual value right now in mining your ticket corpus to train your response bot, et cetera. Versus in 2018, 2019, workflows were a part of ticketing, but not as robust as what you see today. So yes, you had to transfer the workflows over, and that was part of it. And the knowledge base had to be transferred over. But actually, one of the things that, first of all, we would import all your tickets from Jira, Zendesk, et cetera. But we found that actually wasn't that big a deal. So it seems like a lot of work, but with a sort of we had a fantastic CS team. With a really good CS team, it actually wasn't that hard. We'd roll out pretty quickly.
Awesome. CS meaning customer success.
Customer success, yes, which is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a crucial component to enterprise sales. And just to wrap up this topic, which one of the things I want to ask about is, if you had chosen the other path to layer on top and to augment instead of replace, maybe it would have been easier. So I'm curious, why did you choose the path of wanting to be the ticketing source of truth?
I think the sort of simple answer is we wanted to go the distance. And to do that, we didn't want to be beholden to some other product or not own the system of record. The value was the system of record, which is the tickets, which is the ticketing system itself. I'm a huge admirer of the Help team. If you remember Help, which then became the Slack integration and Jira Service Management, that was a beautiful, focused, clear approach of, hey, you have Zendesk, you have Jira Service Management, maybe they added Freshservice at some point. We are the Slack integration on top of that. Fantastic, super specific, super niche. Huge admirer of companies like Moveworks. Hey, you have ServiceNow. We are the Slack and machine learning layer on top of that. There is absolute elegance and value and to that approach. And I have nothing but respect for both teams. For what it's worth, we were like, no, we want to be the full stack solution. And I guess we like pain, but also I think, let me give you a simple, one of the reasons. Like, one of the reasons is if you own the full ticketing system, then you own the ticket corpus, you own the database. You can, a key part of how we thought about it and something that I maintain was an incredibly important part of atSpoke that to this day, when we talk to ex-atSpoke customers, they still talk about was our design, was our ease of use. And if you're sitting on top of somebody else's tool, you don't get to actually create an intuitive experience between how the interaction is in Slack and how the ticket is updated and how the knowledge base is updated and how the model is trained. Versus we got to do that. Like, you asked a question about land and expand that I never answered. But one of the key things about Spoke was it was a beautiful tool. And we were proud of that. It was easy to use. It had all the power that you require from an ITSM. But guess what? It wasn't overwhelming or it wasn't scary for an HR team to use it. It wasn't scary for legal to use it. It wasn't scary for facilities to use it because it was intuitive, it was easy to use. And that was incredibly important. Like a stat that we learned to land with IT. And then as in our later years, like years 4 and 5, we also were able to start by landing in HR at larger organizations. But our primary landing spot within companies was the IT team, where we replaced their existing ITSM, or we were the first ITSM. That said, the average Spoke customer had something like 11 teams using Spoke. So it wasn't just IT. It was the data science team. It was facilities, legal, HR, marketing, sales ops. Everyone in the company got on it. It was beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes complete sense. By owning the ticketing system, you can build a better, more modern, more intuitive experience. It's easy for other departments to use. And what a powerful growth lever to showcase atSpoke to the HR team or the sales operations team who they don't have the time to set up Freshservice or JIRA, especially not JIRA, but that doesn't mean they can't benefit from ticketing. I'm sure atSpoke was a breath of fresh air for them. And you may not have been able to do that as easily incorporating your own design principles if you didn't own the ticketing stack. So
no, even things like performance, the speed at which the ticket is updated based on what is the benefit of something like Slack? You're chatting. It's real time versus a ticket takes like 30 seconds to update. If you don't own the ticketing system and if it's not optimized for performance, then you're like typing 7 things versus in Stitchflow, the IT team would be in the Stitchflow UI typing at the same speed as someone typing in, not today's Slack. I think Slack's slow today, but in those days, Slack was fast and you could type in Slack, you could type in Stitchflow and we would stay synced. And I think things like that is what matter.
Amazing. Yeah. And anytime I send an email to an IT help desk in my career when that's happened, I just think, well, that probably just went into a black hole. I'll never hear about that again. So you're definitely right that Slack facilitates faster communication. Okay, 2 more quick lightning topics, and then I'd love to get to learn more about what you're doing today, which is Stitchflow. But before we get there, you mentioned help. And I'm curious, when did they come onto the scene in your journey? Did you ever see yourselves as competitors, or how did customers see atSpoke compared to help back in the day?
It's a great question. I'm trying to recall. I think so. We started Spoke in 2016, and I think Help. I mean, I'm probably wrong on this, but as I recall it, I think Help came around in 2017 or 2018. But then they were around for around 2 years, I think, and then got acquired by Atlassian. There were definitely, I think, some situations where it made more sense for someone to use a Help than a Spoke, because hey, I have JIRA, I really want the Slack integration, but it's a lot of lift to move over to Spoke, or hey, you don't have X, Y, and Z features that I'm using in JIRA Service Management, and we're like, no, it's coming, but they preferred to. And so there were definitely situations like that where it was easier for them to use Help. But often the folks that we were talking to were the folks that qualified themselves in first as people that were willing to switch their entire ticketing system. And so, frankly, more often than not, we didn't have some sort of bake-off with Help. It was straight up, hey, do I renew with my existing ticketing system? Like the behavior at the end of the day was mainly around renewal time. Do I renew with my existing ticketing system, or do I go to something net new? Is sort of how that worked out.
That makes sense. Okay, you were already filtering for the customers that were unhappy with their ticketing system. And
it's everyone, by the way, who's happy with their ticketing system. But yes, exactly. No, I said which was everyone. Who's like no one is happy.
Which was everyone.
Yeah.
Who goes home at the end of their workday and say, "Man, that was such a joy to use JIRA all day long." No offense to JIRA. So, okay, the other quick thing I wanted to touch on was AI. You mentioned AI then versus AI now. Just real quick, like what is the transformation that you're seeing? What are in terms of capabilities for serving up a next gen product? Are there things that are just going to be remarkably easier today versus what they were then in terms of AI capabilities? And how are you thinking about how AI is changing the IT space?
Oh, wow. There's no question. It's so much more capable now. So when we started Spoke in 2016, we were doing natural language processing and semantic search. The whole initial principle was out of 100 tickets, around 20 to 30 were knowledge-based requests. They actually didn't require IT to have to go do something. It was usually like, hey, here's the Confluence article, or here's the answer to your question. And so early on, we were very focused on semantic search. Like basically someone says, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? Someone else says, how do I get on the Wi-Fi? And understanding that they're both the same query that then maps to Office, whatever Wi-Fi code. And matching that was where we spent a lot of time. And in those days, that was like, we had just come out of Google. Our head of ML was from the Google Brain team. He was super smart. He then went on to be at Neva, and now he's at Snowflake. He's like a genius. So we had fantastic ML researchers. My second head of ML, who's Pierre, who's now my co-founder at Stitchflow, again, fantastic ML brains. But that was the state of the art in ticketing ML in 2016. Hey, like understanding the intent of what someone is asking and then matching it to the best article. And we were learning across organizations and then improving the models and understanding that someone uses this word, somebody else uses this word, and they're actually the same thing. That was the type of stuff that we're doing. So that was...
Were you building your own models?
Yes, absolutely. We had to. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had to, and then we had to have our whole... We had to have our entire ML training pipeline that was separate, and then that would feed into basically Spoke production. And so that was a non-trivial hard thing. So initially, semantic search, natural language processing, knowledge base, retrieval and response. And I think we probably got to 20, 25%. I'd say the average knowledge. So our ticket deflection rate, first of all, it depended on the team. If we were serving HR, the ticket deflection rate was 20, 25%. If we were serving IT, it was probably closer to 10 or 15% on average. There were some teams where we got to 50 or 60%. But frankly, it was, hey, based on what I'm asking, coming back with the right knowledge-based response. And a key part of it, and again, why it was important for us to own the UI and the whole ticketing system was the human in the loop approach to actually train the model as you used it. So Spoke was extremely good at getting better at understanding what someone was asking for, as long as someone was curating the knowledge base and making sure that they saw the response that Spoke gave to a question that still became a ticket and then mapped it to the right answer, et cetera. So that was the early days. And 2019, we started using the sort of first transformer-based models. We started using BERT. And so we went from semantic search, natural language processing, just knowledge-based responses to then also being able to classify requests. So essentially, if someone says, hey, I need access to blah, knowing to route it to the right sub-team. And keep in mind, Spoke was a single Spoke bot for the company. And so when we have 11 teams, backend teams that are using Spoke, and an employee goes and says, hey, is Monday a holiday? Someone says, I need a new laptop. The third person says, can I log this field in Salesforce? Spoke needs to know which team to send it to, figure out whether it's a knowledge-based request or not. And then even within the team, then classifying it as a ticket type so that it then got routed to the right sub-team. And then once we had workflows, even kick off workflows. So that was the sort of journey that we went through until we got acquired by Okta. Now, if we were to do Spoke, or if Spoke were to continue, I mean, what we're able to do now with Gen AI, I think it's and LLMs, it's a completely different ballgame. It's a completely different ballgame. I wish Spoke was still around in some ways, because I think I can totally see sort of what is possible on that UI. And so, I think the game has completely changed in terms of the AI expectations as well as capabilities of ticketing systems.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As you were talking about that, creating your own models, using BERT, figuring out the first principles of natural language processing, I was just thinking, wow, that sounds so challenging and must have been so time consuming, and you needed, very focused, dedicated, smart people to do that. And what an unlock it's been to have these APIs that can call into OpenAI and these pre-built foundational general models to do a lot of this with nothing more complicated than simply a library of prompts and doing prompt engineering and having a set of evals. it really has opened up the multiple new doors for what's possible. And the last thing I'll say is if atSpoke were around today, well, atSpoke may not be, but I kind of see Risotto as a success.
No, I was actually, that's what I was going to say. I'm actually a huge fan of Risotto because here's the thing. The AI capabilities that you're able to leverage are much more advanced, but it's not enough to just have that. You still need to have a complete product that is thoughtful, that is easy to use, that's intuitive, that is multi-team, that works with Slack, and also then knows how to apply the AI. I'm a huge fan of Risotto for exactly that reason. It's not, oh, you need 17 features, let's go add them as a checklist. No, it is a thoughtful combination of all of those things. And great, now you don't have to go spend a ton of time building your own AI models. Fantastic, because you're going to need to spend that time improving sort of how that AI then enables the full Risotto product. So I completely agree with that.
100%, 100%. And thank you for the kind words. That's definitely the goal. And we also see ourselves as walking in the footsteps of people before us like yourselves. And that's given us a huge boost. So thank you so much. And the last thing I want to ask you about is that acquisition by Okta. I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this. Okta, of course, is just a renowned company with an incredible platform, an incredible team. It's just remarkable how much they've grown. And what was it like to be acquired by Okta? Was that, I assume, the culmination of the success? You must have been thrilled. Were you happy with the offer? Maybe you could just tell me about that part of the journey.
Huge fan of Okta. That's like sort of my answer in a sentence. You know, I think when selling your company, it made sense, and the deal closed in August of 2021. It was a good outcome for us, a reasonable outcome for the investors. It made sense, and there's some I wish we had kept going and been around long enough to experience LLMs and Gen AI, but it also made a ton of sense to sell to Okta. So the story there, Okta decided to get into identity governance, get into IGA, and they were super smart. And George Kwan, who was one of the product leads at Okta, who's now, by the way, one of the product leads at Google Workspace, super smart, lovely person. He realized, hey, let's not just go build another SailPoint, another Savient where you're just trying to do like access certification to rubber stamp your IGA process. Let's actually incorporate access requests, access certification, and reporting into one easy to use, intuitive product. And so he had that vision and wanted that for Okta. And Spoke was basically the access request and a part of the access certification part of Okta IGA. So basically we were acquired by Okta, and then we became half of Okta IGA. And I believe this is public information. Within like 2 years, they got to something like 100 million in revenue just from the IGA product. So Spoke lives on that way, and I'm thrilled for how that went. In terms of Okta as a company, I could not be a bigger fan. I spent a year there and then got the itch to go start something again, and so started Stitchflow. But incredible company, incredible people there, and absolutely such a critical part of the IT ecosystem. And it was just a lovely experience. In fact, I would say 80% of the atSpoke team, we got acquired in August of 2021, is still at Okta because it's such a great company.
Awesome. And it's okay if you're not able to share, but are there any figures that have been shared about the acquisition amount?
I believe we're not allowed to share that information. I will say this though, they've definitely realized a excellent ROI on the acquisition already.
Yeah, just given the success of Okta OIG, right?
Okta IGA.
IGA, okay. Which is a separate SKU. Of course, they charge separately for it, and so they're able to capture more value. Yep, 100%. Amazing. Well, what a journey. You obviously had an incredible time throughout those, about a 6-year journey, it sounds like.
5. I think we sold right after the 5th anniversary.
Yeah. and you're back for more. You did a little stint at Okta afterwards, and it sounds like you're back in the saddle for your third venture, which is what I'd like to hear about next. If you have a few more minutes to tell me about, well, let's start with this. What is Stitchflow essentially? What is the core value prop you're trying to solve with Stitchflow? And yeah, maybe let's start there.
Yeah. So Stitchflow helps IT teams automate unautomatable SaaS management is sort of the simple thesis. We serve IT teams that have no options but to spend 2 days a week manually managing their SaaS ecosystem, making sure offboarded users have been removed from every tool, making sure renewals are taken care of, making sure everything is compliant. So the origin and why we wanted to start Stitchflow was I had this constant question of, frankly, why is IT not more automated? When you go talk to a lot of IT teams, there's still so much manual work that they have to do. And our answer to that question, our core thesis behind Stitchflow is it has to do with two things. The first is the obvious one, which is they're just dealing with a lot of apps that don't talk well with each other. They just have a lot of data silos and a lot of applications. However, the second thing, so that's app sprawl. Every IT team needs to deal with app sprawl. However, it's not just app sprawl because we've known about app sprawl for a while now, and yet IT is not automated. So why is that? And our core thesis is it's not just app sprawl, it's also what we call business sprawl. Essentially, I don't just, if I'm an IT manager in a modern company and we're supporting 50 SaaS tools, I am not just managing those 50 SaaS tools, I am managing those 50 SaaS tools in the context of all the different roles and locations and departments and special projects and exceptions. So if I need to offboard an employee, I need to go through 50 different apps. If I need to make sure that the renewal is right, I need to understand every combination of application with all of your business sprawl combination as well. And it is really, really hard to automate that. And so that is what we're trying to solve for. And so essentially what we do is when you have a complex environment, because, for example, a bunch of your tools don't have SCIM or SSO. So in other words, there's no way to automate it. You have to manually manage your SaaS tools. Or you have a bunch of contractors that are coming and going. Or you have multiple email domains within your company and tools don't talk well in those situations. Or your access policies keep changing because you're in hyper growth. In all those situations, IT teams are dealing with it manually. What Stitchflow does, we stitch all of your IT data together into a graph. We basically have connected data, created data pipelines, bring in all of your data from every tool, including the tools that don't have APIs, bring it all into a graph. And then we essentially do all your SaaS management for you on the graph. We find all the offboarded users that shouldn't be there. We find all the license opportunities that need to be taken care of. So essentially, we automate the unautomatable parts of SaaS management.
Wow, that's awesome, and it sounds like a really difficult and hairy problem. I mean, you mentioned in passing, we can automate things for applications even if they don't have an API. That's pretty awesome. And it sounds like probably one of the few, if not only, options available for something like that. And I've heard a lot of people tell me things like, there's more and more pushback against the SSO tax, and a lot of companies, a lot of products want to charge extra for SSO. And if they do, and you're not on board with that, then what options do you have to streamline provisioning and onboarding and offboarding? It sounds like this is the space where Stitchflow really thrives. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly right. So it's the SSO tax, but it's also the SCIM tax. Even if I can do SSO, if I don't have SCIM, I'm still having to go then manually deprovision the users. And so that is a great example of a major pain point that we solve for organizations. Like take Atlassian. The Atlassian admin interface for JIRA, Confluence, JIRA Service Management, et cetera, is not known for its ease of use. But on top of that, they charge $4 to $8 per user per month for Atlassian Guard, which is the only way for you to get SSO and SCIM. And if you're not willing to pay that tax for just Atlassian, then it falls on IT. And that is just one example of all the different tools. So not having manually managed apps is sort of how I think about it. Not having SSO, not having SCIM, we absolutely crush that. Or I just have a bunch of contractors that are coming and going, and each contractor has a different set of rules. We crush that. So there are all these different things that people need to deal with, but you're absolutely right. Manually managed apps are a key part of it.
Awesome. And just in closing here, I suspect that a lot of our viewers for this podcast will be in the IT space. They could very well be interested in Stitchflow. Is there a certain type of an IT buyer that Stitchflow is particularly effective for, whether that be size of company or existing tech stack or industry or anything along those lines?
Actually, one of the things I love about IT and something from the days of Spoke onwards is every industry needs IT. And so there's actually a beauty in sort of the range of industries and stuff that we serve. The way I would think about it is we have a very simple qualification criteria. Do you spend a not insignificant amount of your week as an IT team manually managing your SaaS applications and spreadsheets? If the answer to that question is yes, then you are suffering from business sprawl. If you're suffering from business sprawl, we're the only way to solve for it. So we have a super simple qualification question. Do you suffer from business sprawl? And the symptom of that is you're spending time in spreadsheets. If the answer to that is no, then congratulations, you've automated your environment. That is the right answer. And we're not a good fit.
Awesome. Well, I love how simple that is. And if somebody is interested, is there a self sign up or how can
Stitchflow.com, STITCHFLOW.com. Sign up for a demo, or I'm Jay.Srinivasan, easy to spell, Srinivasan at Stitchflow.com. So just please drop me a note.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jay. And I also, by the way, want to compliment you on your efforts to build an IT community. It's something that I find very inspiring, and it's something we're also trying to do at Risotto. I see you doing amazing things like creating a job board for people in IT looking to switch roles or who might be out of work, and just creating self-serve free tools for people to use to solve other problems that they may have, and just offering these for free. And I love that because I don't think there's enough IT community out there. And when I see the work that you're doing and the work we're attempting to do here at Risotto, I think it's really important because, the community is the ties that bind us together. And it starts with finding ways to help each other out. And all of these things are geared towards that. So I just wanted to compliment you and say, we're taking notes and we're trying to follow in your footsteps.
No, thank you. And right back at you, like the meetups that you've been organizing, the dinners that you've been doing. I think IT they have such a hard job. So much of what a company does relies on them, and they don't get enough love, and having sort of third spaces for them to be able to spend time, I think is incredibly important. By the way, like part of the goal here, and thank you for mentioning the job board. Yeah, we've built a free IT job board that we curate and add roles to. We have a free contract renewal tracker. We have a free app access matrix. And I think part of it is we have 3 values in terms of our company. The first is you really got to want to serve IT. And it's not for everyone, but we are passionate about enabling this group of folks. And I see that we got into IT. You and your co-founders are IT people from start. And I just absolute admiration for that. And we want to serve, just like Risotto, we want to serve the IT community. That's why after atSpoke, I left Okta to start another company. And not just me, my co-founders, Tanya, Pierre, Shankar, we want to serve IT. No, absolutely.
100%. Yeah. And you're showing it with your actions. And so, once again, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me. I love this conversation. It was a lot of fun. This was our first podcast, and I'm really excited to see the outcome. And once again, thank you, Jay. And if anybody is interested in Stitchflow, check out Jay's website, stitchflow.com. You can see all those tools he talked about, the free tools, and of course, the job board, and you can try out Stitchflow yourself. So thank you again, Jay, and thank you for watching the first Risotto podcast.
Thank you.